Well, as some of you, or maybe most of you know, Joy and I were able to go to the district meeting. This is where all the alliance churches, their pastors get together. We had some business we needed to do as a district in New England where they updated the bylaws. We voted on our president, our district superintendent, excuse me, and Trevor Scalberg, who you've met, who's been here, was voted in for another 4 years. And then he shared the vision for that and for the next 4 years, and just encouraging all churches to be in and on board with what the district is trying to do, which I'll share with you in a little bit. We also had our newly elected president, Jonathan Schaefer, and it was great to see him. I went to school with his younger sister. In fact, his younger sister is someone who's now serving in Senegal, who we partner with, and so I was able to just chat with him and ask how things are going. But beside business, there was also a time of encouragement and a time where pastors lift up one another, where the district also tries to provide things that help pastors. So it was like a mountaintop experience for us, where they brought in a gentleman who does counseling specifically for pastors, and we had some other things that just were very encouraging for pastors at this time. And there was also ideas that pastors would share about ministry. I found it interesting that in Matthew, we just covered the mountaintop experience where Jesus and disciples, I think, were encouraged. They had renewed energy, but what also happened was they had to return back to the valley where they had to go live out their faith amidst everything that is going on, through the ups and downs of the world, through the trials and the joys. So Joy and I both needed these 3 days, and after a long winter tax season and the drain that is, dealing with the cares of people and the troubles of this world. And the theme of the conference was stories. And they took the theme from the following verse in Psalm 107, verse 2. Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their stories. Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their stories. And so today I want to take a look at the entire chapter in Psalm 107, and it's on page 868 in your Pew Bible if you're following along. So this is just going to be a quick overview. And why do we need this? Well, my next slide, this is the title. The next slide says, people need to hear stories of faith. They need to hear the stories of faith. And so this psalm basically encourages believers to share their stories. So let me read the first 3 verses for you. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. Let the redeemed of the Lord say this, those he redeemed from the hand of the foe, those he gathered from the lands, from east and west, from north and south. He's encouraging them as they come together to share their stories of faith. What has God been doing? Why? When you share stories of faith, it shows that God is alive, God is active, and God is doing great things. You see, when you share your story, people can't argue with your story because this is something that has happened to you and they can't argue with it. But your story could end up encouraging someone else. It could help someone live out their faith. It could be so important that it helps them not to give up, to keep on going. So he says, come together from north, south, east, west, come together and share your stories because we need them. And this brings us into verse 4 to 9. And this is what it says. Some wandered in desert wastelands, finding no way to a city where they could settle. They were hungry and thirsty, and their lives ebbed away. Then they cried out to the Lord in their troubles, and he delivered them from their distress. He led them by a straight way to a city where they could settle. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love, for his wonderful deeds for men. For he satisfies the thirsty and fills the hungry with good things. See, there's people out there that they're wandering. They're wandering around, they're lost, and they have no direction. They don't know where they're going or what they should be doing in life. And when it talks about a city back there was a place of security, a place of belonging, a place where there's resources. And so these people have no place to belong, no place for security, and they lack stuff. And then they have a deep desire for direction and deep desire for hope, but all they're left with is hungering for that direction, hungering for that hope, thirsting for direction, thirsting for hope, and they really are exhausted because they're spiritually wandering through this world and they are lost without God. And so they're confused and they're looking for meaning. The world may promise a lot of satisfaction, but it leaves people empty and unsatisfied. And so the people are wandering all over the place. But finally, it tells us they look to God, they cry out to him, and God responds and leads them on a straight path. He gives them direction. He gives them hope. They're given security. They feel like they belong. They are satisfied now. You see, no one is beyond God's guidance. No one. God is there. He's ready to show up and show them the way. See, when we were down in Boston, we made a trip into Boston, and how we got in there and about was through a GPS. Now, if you think about this, a GPS can't help you until you turn it on. A GPS can't tell you where to go unless you admit that you don't know the way you can go. And so you turn on that GPS, but then when you turn it on, you need to listen. And it says take a right, you take a right. It says take a left, you take a left. When it says you're here, you're there. You know, and hopefully you are where you're supposed to be, because sometimes GPS can be out. But unlike that, God can show you the way, but you have to be willing to call out to him and listen to him. Turn on your spiritual GPS, so to speak. And then give thanks to the Lord. Share your story because people need direction. So point number one under this, they need to hear the story because people are lost and they're wandering. They need to hear about your story, how you found your way. So share your story. Verse 10 to 16, let's jump down and look at those verses now. Some sat in darkness and the deep gloom, prisoners suffering from iron chains, for they had rebelled against the words of God and despised the counsel of the Most High. Because of their sin, you know what they're in darkness. They're in bondage. I mean, they made choices to go away from God to do their own thing. And remember, sin promises freedom, but it only produces bondage. And some people, they end up with an addiction, a destructive habit, endless cycles of doing wrong. They become bitter and full of shame because they remain in their sins because they don't want to get out of it right now. God is showing them the way, but because of pride, they says, I want to do my thing my way. And so their lives are full of trials. They never get ahead. They never find freedom. They can't find the help they need. And so this is what happens, verse 12. So he subjected them to bitter labor and stumbled, and was no one to help. But then what happened? Verse 13. Then they cried to the Lord in their troubles, and he saved them from their distress. He brought them out of the darkness and the deepest gloom and broke away the chains. See, because they turned to God, God freed them. They were no longer in bondage to the very thing that held them hostage. They were free. And so let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love and his wonderful deeds for men. He broke down the gates of bronze and cut through the bars of iron. You see, a lot of times gates were made out of wood. So if you had a gate of bronze, that was a strong fortification. But God can break down that very thing that is holding you really tight. Take away those chains, the bars that are holding you in. He can break them down, but you have to do what? You have to give your life over to him. And God will set you free. But you have to be willing to leave the prison. So, point number 2. After point number 1, it says people are lost and wandering. People are in bondage to sin. They need to hear your story about how to be free, how to get away from all this stuff that is holding down. Something that will bring them freedom, give them new life, give them a future. So give thanks to the Lord and share your story because people need freedom. Let's go to verse 17 to 22. Some became fools to their rebellious ways and suffered affliction because of their iniquities. You see, they made bad choices. They chose to do what they wanted when they wanted, and they turned away from God, and they suffered for it. They loathed all food and drew near to the gates of death because they made bad choices. Their life was just spiraling out of control. And it's almost like their only hope was death. They were in bondage to all this sin because of their bad decisions. And then it says, then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he saved them from their distress. He sent forth his word and healed them. You see, the word of God is important here. God speaks life. And we can't have that life unless we listen to that word. And God would heal them. He rescued them from the grave. They thought death was the answer, but God raised them up and gave them new life. So let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love and his wonderful deeds for men. Let them sacrifice thanks offering and tell the works with songs of joy. Let them share their story. Why do people need to hear story? Point number 3. People make bad decisions and it leaves them in a mess. What they need is they need to hear the word of God that shows them direction, gives them guidance, and then it turns their trials into triumphs. So give thanks to the Lord. Share your story because it will heal the broken. Verse 23 on to verse 32. Others went out on the sea in ships. They were merchants on the mighty waters, going about their business, doing what they were supposed to be doing. They're merchants, and they went out to go and make a living. They saw the works of the Lord, his wonderful deeds in the deep, for he spoke and stirred up tempests and lifted high the waves. They mounted up to the heavens and went down to the depths. In their peril, their courage melted away. You see, they were so into what they were doing, they had no reason to look to God. But then God brings a storm into their life to get their attention, and they see that God is at work. They reeled and staggered like drunken men. They were at their wits' end. Because they were all just pursuing things in this world, chasing after that. And God is out there trying to get their attention. He gets their attention. They realize it's God calling them. And what do? They cry out to the Lord in their trouble. And he brought them out of their distress. You see, God is calling people constantly, but they're always going about their own way, doing their own thing. And sometimes God has to take a 2x4 and whack them up the side of the head and said, I'm here. I'm here. When some people cry out to God, others turn against God and yell at God. But God's trying to say, I'm here. Look and see. He stilled the storm to a whisper, and the waves of the seas were hushed. Where do we hear that in the New Testament? Jesus on the boat as he's walking out on the sea in a storm. All he has to do is speak a word, and the storm is stilled. You see, God in the Old Testament is bringing stillness to a storm, calming things down. What does Jesus do? Showing I am God by stilling the storm. And they were glad when it grew calm, and he guided them to their desired destination. You see, when you follow God, God brings you where you need to be. Rather than chasing dreams that take you away from God, God is trying to get your attention and say, hey, I can bring you to where you need to be, where I want you to be, to live and serve me. So, verse 31, let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love and his wonderful deeds for men. Let them exalt him in the assembly of the people and praise him in the council of the elders. So come together and share your stories. So why do people need the stories of faith? Number 4, people experience storms in life, and they need to be centered once again. They need to know that God is there. Let them share. Come together. Why do we assemble? This is just not to go through some ritualistic action, show up to church and go home. Part of it should be to share stories of faith, to encourage one another. Because maybe your story will impact someone here. Any of these 4, someone's lost and wandering, you tell a story. They get on the right track. Someone's in bondage to sin, you share the story, and they find freedom. They make bad decisions, but your story may help them make better decisions in the future so they don't suffer. And then last, people experience storms and they may need to know the foundation that they forgot about. So share your stories, because God can bring peace in a troubled world. Now, as we go on in verse 33 and following, he turned rivers into deserts, flowing springs into thirsty ground, and then fruitful land into salt waste because of the wickedness of those who live there. He turned the deserts into pools of water and the parched ground into flowing springs. There he brought the hungry to live, and they found a city where they could settle. They sowed fields and planted vineyards and yielded a fruitful harvest. He blessed them, and the numbers greatly increased, and he did not let their herds diminish. Then it talks about it again, and the ups and downs. And the next one, verse 39, and down. Then their numbers decreased, and they were humbled by oppression, calamity, and sorrow. He who pours contempt on nobles made them wander in a trackless waste. But he lifted the needy out of the affliction, increased the families like flocks. The upright see and rejoice, but all the wicked shut their mouths. Whoever is wise, let him heed these things and consider the great love of the Lord. Well, here's God is the one who turns things around. God is the one who he takes what is bad and makes it good. That's why he's a good God. Because he takes that which is horrible and takes something good out of it. Sometimes the trials to show us who is in control and to turn to someone, and who that person is, it's God when things are bad. So don't forget about God. And so tell your stories of faith, because why? Next point, people need to know that God can turn things around. God can take it and take the mess and make it better. And then we're reminded of this. Back to verse 2. Verse 2. Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their stories. And so at district conference, we started to hear some stories. So I'm going to ask Joy to come up and help me share some of these stories with you. Stories that impacted our lives. Well, first, I want to talk a little bit about what other churches are doing in our district. Up in Duxbury, Vermont, there was a food shelf that the people who were running the food shelf said, we're worn out, we're tired, we need a new place for this food shelf to go. And so they came to this church, which was one of the few places in town which could probably hold it, and they asked, and the church said yes. And so they're making connections with people in the community through this food shelf. Joy, you got a mic? Speak into that one. There we go. Can you turn it up a little bit? Joy's going to tell a story about 2 hospice chaplains that are work with the CMA.
So, can you hear me? Got it now? Good? Okay. 2 hospice chaplains, one Debbie and the other one Louie, both work together. And Debbie was sharing that when she was called in to meet with a gentleman who was in hospice, 2 of his brothers were there with him. And his sister wasn't there, but she's the believer, and she had been for years telling him about Jesus. So as he's nearing the end of life, she walks in and the two brothers are there, and they just pummel her with questions. They want to know everything they can about Jesus, Bible, everything. After they're done asking all the questions, then he starts to ask the questions. And he gets answers to the things that are plaguing his mind about Jesus Christ. And he says, I want that. And right then and there, he gave his life to the Lord. The second story she shared was about a man that had been interested in the Bible. She met with him and she was reading to him out of the Bible. And he also said, I want that. And when she read the part in Acts about the believers being baptized, he said, I want to be baptized. Being that he's in the bed, she can't dunk him in water. So she said that would create a mess. So she just sprinkled his head with the water, and he was baptized in a believer. And those two men now are in heaven. So we thank the Lord for that.
Then there's down on the Cape, one of the churches down there was trying to find out how to help a gentleman. Now, this gentleman was a very staunch atheist at the time. And they met him, I can't remember how, I think they were delivering food during the COVID era. And so they developed a relationship with this guy. This guy couldn't get out of his house. He was 500 pounds. And but he came to faith through those meetings and wanted to come to church. Well, at the same time, they were looking, okay, how do we get this guy to church? And they were offered one of the nursing home vans for $20,000. Normally, they're close to $100,000. And so they got a deal on it. So they went ahead and bought this van, and this man's life was changed so drastically that he has lost over 250 pounds. He gets on this van every day because it has a chairlift on it. And then as they were driving out there again, now remember, the people driving this van have to, be committed to it because people are relying on them. And so they first started off with this one gentleman and this lady who had been praying for years. God, I want to get to church, but I have no way. Saw this van pull up, saw this man getting put on the van. So she went out and said, hey, what's going on here? And they said, well, we're bringing him to church. And she goes, I want to go too. So just something simple as giving someone a ride led to opportunities for God to move. Not big planned projects, but just listening and doing what they hear. Another church was looking for property because it was been a church plant for many, many years, gone through several different pastors, and so they didn't have their own property. And they came along, this is in the South Shore of Boston. They came across a church that was struggling and couldn't pay their bills. So they said, let's do this. Through prayer and much discussion, what they did was these two churches came up with a plan. The Alliance Church would buy the building below market value, which saved a lot of money, but they would allow the other church to use it free of charge, to allow two churches to exist and to present the gospel of Jesus Christ. Those are some things that is happening in the district with the churches. But then we also tell you about church planting. Now, in church planting, it was Trevor said, I want to plant 50 churches in my time as a district superintendent. He's already had 4 years in. He's getting ready to start another 4. And it was pretty much 98% of the pastors wanted him to return to be a pastor, the district superintendent. So let me tell you where we are in church planting. Remember Gary, who's been here several times? Gary was our church planting director, and he started a whole pathway of how to build churches and go from there. You see, the old model was take a guy, dump him into a community, pay him a salary, and then slowly wean him off. How the Alliance is doing is take a church planter, have him go into community he feels called, he gets a job, and he starts sharing his faith and starts leading people to Jesus first. Because if you do it the other way, guess what tends to happen? You start gathering other believers from other churches, and that's not what we're about. We're about bringing new people in the kingdom. Right now, there are 20 church plants all over New England. 20. 20. There are 3 getting ready to start in 2027. There are 8 church planters getting ready, are in the application process. So where are we at? We're up to now 31. And then there are 13 more church planters who are starting the application process. So we have 44 church plants. When you get 20 are already going and moving. They're on the pathway at certain levels. And we're going to share a little bit about church planting. And first of all, I'm going to tell you, up in Warren, Vermont, there's a guy, pastor by the name of Lincoln. He shared a story about how he was buying a house. But there was a bidding war going on with this house. It was one that was, one of those like HUD homes that you buy and then you have to fix up. And so they ended up getting it, and this other couple, of course, were a little distraught. But guess what? Lincoln's wife works at a place, and the place she works, this woman who wanted the house works. And so, long story short, this woman did not like Lincoln's wife because they got the house, we didn't. And so she was doing everything just to stay away from her. But she finally came up to Lincoln's wife. I don't remember her name. He did mention it once, but we didn't catch it. She looked at this woman's life and was impacted in such a way that she heard the gospel and is now attending the church plant. You see, her husband's not there yet. But Lincoln is reaching out to this man. God is doing something and you don't know how he's going to do it, Joe.
So the other, we heard a couple of videos from our international workers, and one that you all
not
know.
international workers. We're doing this now.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, we're at the church planters right now.
All right, church planting in Portland, Maine. So this guy Isaac, he and his wife landed in Portland, Maine. Give you a little bit of history on them, is they're African. Keep that in mind as I tell you the story. He and his wife decided that they were going to go out into the streets of Portland, Maine, and they were going to talk to every single person they ran into about Jesus. They prayed and they went out. They're walking around. There's nobody out there. Nobody for them to talk to because it's the dead of winter. All of you get it. They didn't understand that until they got out there because they're from Africa. So they were just trying to figure out. He's like, God, this was the strategy. Go out on the streets and talk to people. What's the strategy now? Well, his wife, being an introvert, was not all crazy about the street ministry thing, but she did have a job. And at her job, she started sharing her faith. And there were 4 women at her workplace that wanted to know about Jesus and the Bible. So she started meeting with them and sharing her faith, and they've come to know Jesus, and they're coming to the church, and it's growing from there. And he's like, now, God, I know what the strategy is. It's workplace. So that was good to hear.
Then, if you remember Ty Hall, who came here and preached last year? Well, the guy from Texas, yes, Springfield. And he told us that this weekend, which would be today, he would be baptizing 3 people. 3 people who have come to faith through the interactions he's had. Remember, it's your interactions with people that matters. And one of the women that has come to faith was a Wiccan. She was wrapped up into the occult, but she's found freedom in Christ. But not all the stories were great and wonderful. One of the church planners who's in Salem, Mass. If you know anything about Salem, Mass, this is where there's a lot of occult practices going on there. Witching and stuff like that. But the thing that he shared with us was a story of being faithful, even though he didn't see much success at this time. You see, he had no stories to share, but he was out there meeting people. And one day he believes there will be stories, they just haven't been written. So remember that. You may be just out there doing something and not seeing the fruit of your labors, but remember, hang in there. And now we're going to missions. And then there was a young lady that was there, a young lady who shared her story about God, how God was working in her life and how God is leading her to go on the mission field. And so she's in that application process right now. So that was exciting. And then we got to hear from Emily. Joy?
So we saw a video of Emily, and she shared that in her daily life, she has to take a taxi to her workplace, where she's in a center to teach people the English language. And the taxi driver is always the same guy who takes her back and forth. So they've had many discussions with each other. And one of these particular discussions recently was him sharing how in his faith he has to do works to get his sins forgiven, and only if he does these things will he get to heaven. And he said, so what about Christians? What do you have to do to take care of your sins? And she said, I don't have to do anything. Jesus has done it all. He's the one who has laid down his life and sacrificed for me to forgive me of my sins. And by accepting that and believing in him and his resurrection, I get to go to heaven when I die. He's like, oh. Well, there's another person that gave me a Bible. He said, I think I need to start reading that.
Mm-hmm. There's one other lady.
Oh, one other one.
You remember her? One she works with.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Right.
Joy's the one who picked these topics, so I'm trying to remind her to stay on. She's a new grandma and her mind's gone. Okay.
There's lots of things on my mind right now.
Yeah.
So the other one that Emily shared was at her workplace, there is a young lady who is very extrovert, caring type of person, and very bubbly type of person. Well, this is totally countercultural personality type for her culture. In her culture, she's not supposed to display those types of things. She's supposed to be reserved and quiet and all this stuff. So she has problems with being accepted by the people in her culture. But she and Emily have gotten to talk to each other, and she's also interested in Emily's faith and knowing the gospel and everything. These two people that she talked about, their stories are just starting as far as their path to Jesus. So their stories are not done yet, but Jesus is writing their stories.
Well, then, just to let you know, something else that's happening within our district is a rise in international churches within our district. At this conference, we had quite a few African pastors who are now part of our district. There were some Korean pastors, Chinese pastors, Vietnamese pastors, all rising up in our district. You see, in our district, there are international churches, all representing 7 countries and 10 different languages. God is doing something, and it was really wild just to look around. It just wasn't vanilla flavored people. It was many people of different backgrounds, different races, colors, and it just reminded me how God says, I'm calling people from every tribe and nation. And so our district is starting to look like that. Also, the residency program. We've told you a little bit about that. It's a program designed to prepare individuals for pastoral ministry. They come on staff, they get a salary, and they're working towards it right now. There's 7 individuals in the residency program throughout New England. Why is this important? Well, the average age of pastors in the CMA across the nation is 52. Okay, 52. This means there's a lot of older men in ministry, and so we need to do something to raise up leaders. And so not only initiative by our district superintendent to plant churches to reach the lost, but to raise up the next generation of leaders. You see in New England there's a large number of men in pastoral ministry. They're over 60 years of age. I mean, 4 years ago it was 40%. Now it's at least half. And so, who will replace them? So, we are praying that God will raise up leaders, godly men who will just step forward and say, I want to take on this mantle and I want to run with it. I want to serve as a pastor of churches. You see, it's hard to run a church if there's no leader. There needs to be someone who keeps the church moving and to organize and function. So, pray for that. So, overall, we got a lot of good stories. These are just a few of them throughout the weekend. But most of these stories were based on relationships these people had with other people, and they were able to share their story with other people. And so we need to continue to live our lives interacting with people. And you say, well, the soil in New England is rocky and hard. Well, you know what? Even the rocky soil of New England can produce crops. All right? It just means we have to work a little bit harder to get rid of all those New England rocks. That those rocks that seem to grow and find their way into the gardens that we have, we can still work the soil and get rid of the rocks. We need to fertilize the soil. We need to plant the seeds. We need to water. We need to remove the weeds, and then something will grow. And just like a garden, it takes time. You see, we have an asparagus patch over there we started a few years back. And you have to plant the seeds, let them grow for a couple of years, and they grow up, and you let them grow till they're almost like weeping willow trees, mini weeping willow trees, and you got to let that happen for 2 to 3 years. And after like the 3rd year, you could start reaping your harvest. Well, that just reminds me of how New England is. It's hard, but you know what? We keep active, we keep doing it. What we are told is that we need to be like a running river that's alive and active, always on the move, and not like a swamp, which is stagnant, unmovable, just sitting there. We need to be moving. So, we received stories this week at District Conference. God is writing stories here. And we try to let you know about those stories. And no matter what age you are, your story is not finished. Your story is continuing to be written. And your final chapter will be when you're called home. Now, I don't know when your final chapter is going to be here, but you're still here. So your story is still being written. So remember, live, collect the stories, share those stories. Can we jump back up to the prior thing? Yeah, people need to hear the stories of faith. What? There are people lost and wandering, people in bondage to sin, people making bad decisions, people experience storms in life, but people need to know that God can turn things around. So, share those stories. Joy, anything you want to add? Okay. So remember that. Share stories. For us, it was great to hear stories of what's happening around New England. Because a lot of these guys we know their wives, we know what they're going through, and to hear stories of God at work just helps us continue on our journey. Because God is not done writing my story. God is not done writing your story.